The mission of U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action is to bring all of American agriculture together with farmers and ranchers at the center to collectively identify and tackle critical long term issues. We have covered each opportunity in the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Commissioned report on the potential for U.S. agriculture to be greenhouse gas negative and shared a variety of options available for farmers and ranchers. As we've learned, farmers and ranchers face challenges across the United States with different weather patterns, soil types, farming practices, and more. We are going to dive into some of those challenges with this interview. Today, we are virtually traveling to Maryland to visit with our guest who co led a research effort to interview 30 farmers and 14 advisors about challenges and opportunities on how Maryland agriculture will respond to climate change and the carbon market. I am joined with Jennifer Gannon, who is the Director for Programs and Public Relations for the Maryland Grain Producers and also farms with her family on the eastern shore of Maryland. Well, Jennifer, to get started, can you provide some background on the why you pursued this study?
Yeah, absolutely, Joanna. So, like you said, I work for the Maryland Grain Producers, and I think, we as farmer representatives need to know farmers' true thoughts and opinions on hot topics like climate change, the carbon market for agriculture, any programs that may be forming. And so then we can help those programs and, things like that better form and work for farmers actually. I talked about the carbon market a little bit there, and it's not technically a new market, I guess, but it has been quite a hot topic. In the last 5 years, there's been a big push to promote it. And so I think it's really important that farmers' voices are heard in the creation of, those programs, the contracts, the requirements, whatever it might be, so that it will be successful and so that farmers will participate.
Right. And why not do some research where you have 30 farmers and 14 farm advisors that are a part of it? What climate related challenges have farmers in Maryland faced?
Yeah, so that was something that we talked about through the interview. And I think a lot of the farmers really talked about kind of the extreme of weather events in recent years. And a lot of the people I talked to, they've been farming, over 30 years plus years. And so they have a good perspective on, how things have changed. And a lot of them noted that, we don't see like half-inch rains anymore. We go through a drought and then you might get a heavy rain. And so, they also did note that some of the changes may be beneficial. Maybe we see a longer growing season now than we did before.
Um, so, before we jump into some of the practices that they've done, I'm curious, what was their perception when you reached out to them to interview them and ask them questions? Were they receptive or did they kind of want to withhold information from you?
No, everyone was super receptive about it. I think Maryland is super unique in that sense because we have been subject to climate change. We are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, so it has been a big conversation for a long time. And I think farmers are just used to talking about it. At this point, they're happy to talk about it. So,
They see that there's a need, their neighbors are having some of the similar challenges. Why not we work together to kind of combat some of those challenges that they might be facing? What are the practices being adopted to combat some of these challenges?
yeah. So, like I said, we're in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So, nutrient management in general has been a huge topic for a long time. The watershed covers the entire state of Maryland and it reaches into Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. So it's definitely here. We see it every single day. So, when I talk to the farmers, a lot of them reported using no-till. We talked about the changing growing seasons a little bit. So we're changing the varieties that we're planting or, the types that we're planting. We're adding irrigation when we can, increasing drainage where you can as well. Um, 20 of the farmers that I talked to through the interview also reported the use of side dressing or increasing splits of nitrogen throughout the season, which obviously, that helps with uptake and we're not wasting fertilizer that way. We're giving it straight to the plant. So that's perfect. And I thought it was really interesting. Only four interviewees said that they weren't really changing anything at the moment. So I think that says a lot that, almost the entire group of people were paying attention and shifting when they could.
Right. We've kind of seen that common theme. Some farms are just really ahead of the ball. Glad to hear that the farmers in Maryland are one of those. I mean, you gave a whole list. A lot of those options that you talked about are things that we covered in the commissioned report with U.S. farmers and ranchers on the potential for agriculture to be greenhouse gas negative. I'm curious, Jennifer, if you want to talk about one of the farms you interviewed, or if you want to talk about your own personal farm, can you share what you guys have done in this area to combat climate change?
Yeah. So our farm, I'll talk about our farm a little bit. We have been cover cropping and no-tilling, obviously, when you can. It's probably not on every single acre, but when it works, we'll use it. And I think we do see it as an effective tool, not only for climate change, but for soil health, and to grow better crops for us.
Mhm. One comment you just made is cover cropping when it works. I always
Mhm.
think that's interesting because sometimes we've had people say that's the silver bullet. That's what everyone has to do. Can you maybe share some of the challenges you've either had with cover crops or other practices that just don't work every single year for you?
Yeah, I think with cover cropping, I said, we don't do it in every single acre, but every year most of our corn ground gets cover crops on it, and that's because it's a timing thing, right? So in the fall, when you're planting these cover crops, you're also in the fields harvesting and you're trucking everything, and so time becomes, a really hard thing to work with. And so when we can get those cover crops in the field and planted, we do it, but sometimes you can't touch every acre.
Right. You don't always have full control. Usually Mother Nature has that reign. Sure. What specific nitrogen management approaches have your farm or other farms implemented?
Yeah, so I think some of the farms in Maryland, they're shifting more towards splitting applications like we talked about. I think most people at least do one. And then, side dressing and of course that helps, for potential loss from heavy rain like we talked about with those extreme events. And so really just trying to put the nutrients where they need to be and when they need to be, is a really important thing.
What was the farmer's perspective on carbon market?
Yeah, so this was my favorite part of the interview. And it's because, the farmer's view is so important when it comes to programs like this, because without their, agreements to it, the programs aren't going to be successful. And so I will say 29 of the 30 farmers I talked to had already heard about the market, so pretty much everyone. 18 of those farmers, though, did express concern about the ethics of the market. And so the farmers, you're getting paid for a practice that they may, especially here in Maryland, already be doing, whether it's cover cropping, no tilling. And so they felt like, for them to get paid so that another company can not really be concerned about their emissions, they felt like that was kind of wrong and they didn't really agree with that. Following that, though, I think the payments was another really high concern because with anything, it's not free. Cover cropping, there's an expense to it, no matter what it is. Reduce nitrogen. If you're going to do that, you're going to lose some yield. So there is an expense there that needs to be compensated if they're going to do it. Um, in addition, I think the farmers were really concerned about being locked into some of the contracts because they may be from 5 to 10 years, whatever it is. And so if you sign into no tillage and you have a wet fall, and maybe you need to go in the spring and, repair some of the fields, you may not be able to do that depending on the contract. So that was a concern. And then I think the final concern there was that they want to see more science behind the carbon market and the sequestration for it to make sure that, the payments are fair, the rates are fair, everything is fair. But I think despite all the concerns, everyone agrees that, an additional income for the farm is always a great thing. No one's going to say no to that, right?
Right. We're trying to find that new revenue stream, but we do have a lot of things that are out of our control. So it does
Exactly.
become a big challenge. And I've kind of heard people say the carbon markets can be a little bit like the Wild West, and we need to find something that fits across the United States. But as we've covered, there's so many challenges in different parts of the United States and different opportunities for them to try to do some of that carbon sequestration practices. Jennifer, from your perspective, what solutions are needed in the future to support the agricultural community?
Yeah. So that is something I always ask the farmers at the end at the end of the interview was, what do you feel like you need? And a lot of times they would say more information because, there's never enough information around these topics. But I do think one thing they talked about was having a third party available for the carbon markets to answer questions about contracts, payments, whatever it might be, and have an expert be able to look at it, because when we read contracts, there's so much to it. So just having someone that really knows what they're looking at to look at it and tell you, where you need to go. I do think also we're super lucky in Maryland to have quite a few, organizations that provide resources, whether it's on nutrient management, programs like this. And so I think, continuing to support groups like that is very important.
Right. There's a whole list out there. I just got to make sure that our farmers have access to them, and we will cover maybe some specific resources that you guys have leaned on. But before we do that, can you share an example of how you see farmers and other industry professionals collaborating on solutions?
Yeah. So, like I said, I work for the Maryland Grain Producers, and that is actually made up of a farmer-led board. So we have over 20 board members, and we meet, every couple months, and they get together and we talk about current issues and like how we want to handle it. And I think that is so interesting because you have farmers, really putting their voices out there so that these organizations can have a solid, agreement on these stances. And within the state, we also have quite a few organizations, like I said, that support farmers. And the one that comes to mind right now is the Mid Atlantic 4R Association. And so they promote nutrient stewardship, and their slogan is about the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. And so having folks like those they do cost share, getting farmers to these um, nutrient management practices that can, make an impact on their farm and our, overarching environment is really important.
Right. We've covered those 4 R's on Farm Food Facts with the Fertilizer Institute
Awesome.
too. It's really cool to see some of the similarities of people that are picking up these different practices and different tactics that they can use in their toolbox. What resources have farmers leaned on to learn more about conservation efforts?
Yeah, so from the research we did, farmers reported that the main places they would go to for information on that would be their fertilizer or chemical dealers, their agronomists, and then other farmers, actually, which I found pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is. We've heard more about peer groups being formed around through different climate smart initiatives where they are working together. So I'm curious, have any universities or you guys have DACAP available? Are there any of those types of institutions that support farmers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the University of Maryland and University of Maryland Extension here, and our extension agents do a lot of work, whether it's through research or sharing the information, through agronomy days, things like that. And that is a good resource as well for farmers.
And has the Maryland grain producers started any events, or is that something that's maybe in the future where you're going to
We
do more?
have, yes. So through our utilization board, which is checkoff dollars, we have funded quite a bit of research through the university on a wide range of topics within ag, or well, grain farming in specific. And then beyond that, we've done some research with the university as well on variety types within corn, barley, and wheat. And so I think this summer we may have a few days to spotlight that research.
Mhm. I feel like I'm having this aha moment where as you're growing up, everyone always tells you to be involved in things, but even as you get older, it's still just as important to be involved in different
Yes.
organizations to be filling your toolbox. Last question for you, Jennifer. What topics or trends are you focused on in the space of carbon markets and conservation efforts?
Yeah, I think it's like I said in the beginning, just keeping farmers' voices the focal point of these conversations. And I said it earlier and I'll say it again, but without their true opinions and their ideas to make things work is nearly impossible. It has to work for the farmer or it won't work at all. So, we have to just keep that in mind when we talk about programs, regulations, whatever it is. If we want it to be effective, it has to work for the farmers.
Right. The farmers have to have the seat at the table and be that leading voice. Also, if you're looking for another resource that can support you on your conservation efforts, I recommend that you check out USFRA's commissioned report on the potential for agriculture to be greenhouse gas negative. You can contact us and we can point you in the right direction to a scientist and provide you some of those valuable resources. Well, we appreciate the time with Jennifer Gannon, who is the Director of Programs and Public Relations for the Maryland grain producers. We hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast. USFRA plays the critical, important role of creating opportunities for collaboration, information sharing, and solution development for the full agricultural value chain. We hope you tune in again and subscribe to Farm Food Facts. I'm your host, Joanna Guza.